welcome to the 11th episode of the Woke-ish podcast. This is Ebony.
And this is Alma.
And this week we're going to be talking homophobia and transphobia in communities of color. But before we get there, we will start out with our shout-out segment. So first on the docket...
So first we wanted to shout out London Breed, who became San Francisco's first African-American female mayor. And what's really cool, other than, breaking barriers and becoming the first of anything, is just more about who she is. And so in a 2016 interview with the San Francisco Examiner, she recalled her childhood, and she says that it was filled with urban deprivation in the city that she now runs. So she's actually from the city that she's the mayor of.
Hello.
And she told the newspaper, 5 of us were living on $900 a month, and once a week we took Grandma's push cart to the community room to collect government-issued groceries. They also noted that her sister died in 2006 of a drug overdose, and her brother is in prison.
Wow.
So, sometimes I think that people who come from certain environments or from certain communities don't feel like you can actually, there's certain things you can do, but in terms of becoming a mayor, maybe that's not for me. So in terms of my personal perception of just her accomplishment, it was that even someone who comes from and is still entrenched in communities and families that have these issues that she's working towards, you can still, get stuff done and be accomplished. So shout out to London Breed, and hopefully she could be an inspiration to a lot more people to turn their personal experience into motivation to do something about it.
Yeah, shout out to her, and that is a really dope name. I don't know if you know.
It was like a rapper's name.
Yeah, I was
London Breed, is it the first rapper? But no, it's like a person.
When I saw you put it in the outline, I was like, what? I had to read it multiple times. I was like, what? That's her name? That's pretty cool. Okay, so this second shout out goes out to South Fulton, and that's a city, I guess, right outside of Atlanta. South Fulton is the first American city in which every criminal justice department head is an African-American woman. So this city is shattering a major glass ceiling for both women and minorities. The Atlanta Voice recently featured the women in a cover story that showed them dressed in all black at the South Fulton County Courthouse. 6 of the women run the most important law enforcement positions in the city. These positions include chief of police, chief judge, court administrator, chief court clerk, city solicitor, and city public defender. So if you are interested in hearing more information about these women or reading more about them, again, they're the cover story for this, I think it's this week or this month's The Voice. And also, you can find information about them everywhere, but I got some of this information from the Atlanta Channel 2 News. So shout out to South Fulton, and shout out to, all of these beautiful black women.
Yes.
So now we will transition to our In the Know segment. So first, this is the most trash I've seen. I don't know, maybe ever.
You had to see the video to believe,
but tell me why I saw the video before I read about it. I saw the video, and I was like, no, I'm not posting that. That looks fake. And then... And then it comes out on the news, and I was like, oh my God, this is real.
I know, it's very sad.
Okay, so a lot of y'all has probably already seen this because it went viral, and thank God the person got arrested. But I think it's Lamone. I don't know how to say that.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Lamone J. Cheeks was arrested for putting her grandchildren. And I'm not clear on, are these grandchildren, I read one source that said that the grandchildren were adopted, but are they her biological?
Okay. I don't know. I read one source, too, that said that they were adopted.
Yeah, so I don't know, but she was arrested for putting her grandchildren in a kennel in the back of her truck. So the video...
dog kennels.
Yeah, a dog kennel. A dog kennel in the trunk of her truck. So the video, I guess, was a passerby just saw this and recorded her Like she had one of those like I don't know what you call those trucks, like an Explorer or whatever. And she's like, the video shows her opening up the trunk, opening the kennel, and then letting the kids out. And the kids are getting out like not even, they don't look like they were really phased by it. It looked like something they were used to. But yeah, so it says that it was recorded by a bystander in Memphis. It was widely shared online. And the grandmother is 62 years old, and she was recorded on charges of child endangerment. She had put two children, ages 8 and 7, inside the dog kennels, the police said. According to the affidavit, the children told officers that there had been no room inside the car. So Miss Cheeks told them to get inside the kennel. And maybe they thought maybe the kids weren't fazed because maybe it was like fun to them or something.
Yeah.
But my gosh, I don't know. But the woman is very like visibly not black. And the kids are very visibly black. And so
which like makes it even more like just uncomfortable and just I don't know. You guys should definitely check out the video. I'm sure if you just type in children in kennels,
oh my God.
you'll see the video, but it's just
hopefully there aren't multiple of those videos.
Oh gosh.
Hopefully that searching that will just take you to this one and that's it. Because
but at least she was arrested and because of someone else. So like, once again, like social media at work, if you see something that you don't feel is right or you feel it is against the law and you just post it, like it will, it really generates results sometimes. And so sometimes if you feel really helpless, just documenting it and putting it available for people to see can sometimes generate really good results.
Yeah. So thank God for, I guess, Memphis County Police Department, because that was just atrocious. That was atrocious. Yes. And hopefully whoever the parents are that entrusted her with their children will never do so again. Because she ain't got no sense. She has her priorities are all the way fucked up.
Yeah. Okay, and so our second, not event, but just June is Pride Month. And so in terms of just kind of celebrating and emphasizing the experiences of sexual minorities, and not just sexual minorities, but also non-gender binary and transgender individuals, which just means that people who don't exclusively identify as a man, as male or female. And so particularly, it was the second anniversary of the Pulse nightclub shooting. And if you don't remember what that was, on June 12th, 2016, Omar Mateen, a 29-year-old security guard, killed 49 people and wounded 53 other in what is now deemed as a terrorist attack inside Pulse, which is a gay nightclub in Orlando, Florida. The Orlando Police Department officer shot and killed him after a 3-hour standoff. And then particularly what marks this, to me, more tragic is that most of the victims were people of color, and that's because the attack happened during Latin night. And so most of the victims were Latino. It happened during Pride Month. And, in terms of the development of the story, they said that this was very calculated, like the fact that it was during Pride Month and the fact that it happened during Latin night. And so it is now regarded as the deadliest incident of violence against LGBT people. And so just wanted to give kind of a current event context to the topic that we're going to talk about, which is homophobia and transphobia, because this was I remember the day that this happened, and as the anniversary came and people were remembering and people not only celebrating Pride Month, but also remembering that there are still so many hurdles and experiences of discrimination and experiences of violence that the LGBT community experiences. And so although it is very, I think, supportive to be able to celebrate Pride Month and to go to the parades and to go to the events, it's also important for us to take this time to reflect on how vulnerable this community is And so just wanted to highlight that and remember the victims as the second anniversary just passed, and hopefully there aren't more instances where we have to have these memorials and anniversaries, but definitely something to think about in this month as we watch and see people talking about pride.
Yeah, thanks for that, Z. My heart still goes out to, all of those, like the parents of those folks, their family, their friends, even the survivors of the attack, because I know that has to be so hard. Like all those videos that were coming out afterward of, like friends of people who had been killed, all of the survivors, people who had been shot but lived. That survivor's guilt is real, and so we definitely can't underestimate that. Yeah. Okay, so with that, we are going to transition into our What's Being Slept On segment for this week, where we'll be discussing homophobia and transphobia in communities of color. And I just want to preface this by saying that there will be obviously tons of people who will continue listening because, the topic for this week is the primary thing that brought them to listen. But then there are also people who will probably tune out at at this point. And I would just really encourage you to dig deep. And even if you have this playing in the background as white noise, just really dig deep and push yourself to continue listening. And if there's anything that you disagree with, or any comment or questions that you have, please reach out to us. We are very open. Even though we have whatever thoughts and beliefs that we may have, we also have networks that don't necessarily think exactly the way that we do. So don't think that we'll be, don't have any fear or hesitation. Like, we are here, we want this to be a community, and so we're open to all your comments and all of your questions. So please send them our way. We always drop our contact information at the end of this segment. So please keep listening.
So I strongly suggest that you wake the fuck up.
Okay, so to get started, we will define what homophobia and transphobia are, just so that we can all start out on the same page and that we all have the same, working definition. And I emphasize working because I think that these definitions do change with time, and they might, the experiences with them may vary. I'm not sure who constructed these definitions, but if you are someone out there that identifies with either of these communities, identifies on the spectrum of LGBTQ, then you may have your own personal definition. Totally fine. So please don't jump down our throats. We're definitely, again, open to comments.
Yes. And so these definitions, actually, the first one comes from the Pride Resource Center. Okay. And so just, homophobia and transphobia have the word phobia in it. And so a phobia, just in general, is a fear of something. Most of the times it's an irrational fear. So if you heard people have arachnophobia, social phobias, and so homophobia and transphobia are another type of phobia. So homophobia first is defined by the Pride Resource Center as a pervasive, irrational fear of homosexuality. It also includes the self-hatred and self-denial of sexual minorities themselves, who have been taught all their lives by a mostly heterosexual society that people like themselves are quote-unquote sick, sinful, and criminal. So not only a fear of just people who are non-heterosexual, and not only among heterosexuals can you have homophobia, but also sexual minorities could have internalized homophobia. And then different thing is transphobia. And so sexual minorities are people who identify as non-heterosexuals, whereas transgender individuals are people who believe that they were born, quote unquote, to simplify, but because it's a much more complicated process, but that they were born in the wrong gendered body. And so if you see people who talk about how they knew that they were men all their lives, but they were born with female reproductive organ. And so transphobia is the fear, hatred, disbelief, or mistrust of people who are transgender, thought to be transgender, or whose gender expression doesn't conform to traditional gender roles. So we're talking about both sexual orientation in terms of homophobia, and then gender identity in terms of transphobia. And that does not mean that a transgender individual is non-heterosexual or a sexual minority. People who transition or people who identify as currently a man or currently a woman and feel attraction to another man or woman, they might be sexual minorities, but you can also be heterosexual. So I know that's really complicated and really complex, and it's something that I think that we can learn more of as we engage and have conversations with people of different communities. We just wanted to start this conversation by differentiating between homophobia and transphobia, but also just highlighting that they're both phobias, and they both are kind of hinging on this fear.
Thank you for those definitions, Zama. So we will transition into, I guess, some questions for one another, mostly directed toward you, Zama. So for those that don't know, Z, do you want to give a little bit of background into your, research interests or pursuits?
Yeah, so my research interest is specifically on experiences of the LGBT community. So I look at not only heterosexual and non-heterosexual individuals, but also people who identify as non-gender binary, which means that they just don't think that they're rigidly in the male-female category, and then also transgender individuals. So just basically looking at the LGBT community, and more specifically at the experiences of people of color. So I focus more on the Black or African American and Latino community. So that's mostly where all my research is. It focuses on the health of this community, the experiences of discrimination in this community, and the experiences of social support. So in terms of being able to talk about and answer some of these questions, I'm going to draw not only on a lot of the studies and research that I've read, but also from the interviews and the research that I've actually done myself. So I'm going to be pulling on that. I'm not going to reveal anyone's name or anything because everything I do is confidential, but definitely this is where I've been focusing the last 6 years of my academic career, and it's definitely not just something that I happened to read for this episode, but something that I really spend most of my time learning about.
Right. Okay, thank you for that. So for the first question, I guess, to get started, so would you say that being uncomfortable, I guess, around people who you perceive to be homosexual is the same as being homophobic?
I don't think so. I think that because, my personal experience is I grew up in a very religious family, and I did my undergrad at a private Christian university. So I've met and been around a lot of people who literally have they think they've never met a non-heterosexual person in their life, and people who have never met a transgender individual. And I think that sometimes that shapes your knowledge and ability to understand experiences of other people. And so I don't think that if you're uncomfortable, you are homophobic. I think that if you're uncomfortable, it highlights some other issues that maybe I would ask you why you're uncomfortable. Is it because they're different? Is it because it makes you question something about yourself? Is it because you're afraid that something's going to happen? But just being uncomfortable, I would not say that you are homophobic. However, if you are uncomfortable and as a result you say derogatory terms or you act in ways that are violent or that are offensive or that discriminate, then I think that that's when it becomes homophobic. But to be uncomfortable, I don't think means homophobic. What about you?
Yeah, no, I would agree. I mean, I think that, so I guess I would agree with maybe a few caveats, because oftentimes there are a lot of people that don't necessarily wear their sexual orientation, and even when we assume that a person is wearing their sexual orientation based on, how they might be acting, or based on different displays, maybe how they talk, maybe how they're dressed or whatever, a lot of those thoughts are actually rooted in homophobia. And so I think that being uncomfortable is based on a lot of assumptions that may or may not be true. And the way that we kind of construct or make those assumptions is based in homophobia. But again, like Z is saying, there is a very big difference between allowing that discomfort to, become or manifest in, something like violent or derogatory or negative, and kind of just maybe being uncomfortable and minding your business and kind of going on with your life. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it depends on how your discomfort manifests. And so if that means like, oh, I'm uncomfortable, so I'm avoiding these people, or oh, I'm uncomfortable, so I refuse to be friends with, or I am, ending friendships with, people who do not identify as heterosexual, then I think that becomes a problem.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I see your point, and that's why I would ask. I would question why people are uncomfortable, but I think if we were to actually do that, you would be right. It would be rooted in a lot of these homophobic assumptions about what it means to be a non-heterosexual person.
Yeah. So, do you think that homophobia in the broader society is waning, or, starting to taper down? And I guess I would add with that, like, if you could talk a little bit about what you think that the same-sex movement has done, if you think that the movement for same-sex marriage has had positive, like, something.
Yeah.
Positive something for the society.
So a lot of people point out that the LGBT movement has been one of the fastest movements in terms of
you said
generating the fastest, yeah, in terms of generating legislative changes in the shortest amount of time compared to the gender movement and the civil rights movement. However, and even with the DOMA, which was the Defense of Marriage Act, being ruled unconstitutional, which means that there was this act that said a man and a man cannot get married, and a woman cannot get married. And then the Supreme Court decided that was unconstitutional, and that's a federal thing. However, currently, states can stop and can not only prohibit same-sex marriage, but also not recognize same-sex marriage. And also, it is legal in many states currently to discriminate against people based on their gender identity and sexual orientation. So although some people say, look at how fast, from the 70s to the protests, to the Stonewall riots, to the Defense of Marriage Act being ruled unconstitutional. But if you look at just what those legislative actually accomplished, you see that they're really more on the books. But if you still can't get married in Kentucky, or if you still can't adopt a child in Texas, or if you can still, like we saw recently, if a baker can say in Colorado, I do not want to bake a cake for you because this is a same-sex marriage, then I think that proves that maybe it's not as waning as we thought. So although I think that there is more visibility in sexual minorities and in transgender individuals, like we do have people like Caitlyn Jenner, we do have people who are on TV, we have RuPaul's Drag Race. Like, we have a lot of things that highlight non-heterosexual and different gender identities. But I think that if we look at the statistics, if we look at poverty rates among these communities, if we look at rates of violence, if we look at rates of discrimination, if even looking at suicide rates, like, we'll see that reflects that it doesn't really align with all this as much progress as people like claim to have. And so I don't know, I think I would say that it is not waning, but it is better than it was 50 years ago.
Right. Yeah, actually, like, one of the things that you said, is a good transition into my next question, because I mean, I've heard this a ton, and definitely heard this in terms of racism, right? So, like, the whole idea that, like, oh, I don't dislike so-and-so people, I just don't want to serve them in my business, or I don't want to serve them in my restaurant, or I don't want them in my restaurant. So, I feel like if you do legalize, and I think that that's one of the big misconceptions, right, is that because something is no longer illegal, because we have legal protections technically around, these folks, then everything is all right with the world. Like, there should be no more complaints. But a lot of times people don't understand how discrimination works, and how, there are tons of, like, even though we have these laws, our laws still have a lot of built-in loopholes, right? So that baker that you're talking about in Colorado, so it's like, even though same-sex marriage is legal, this person is still able to draw on their quote-unquote First Amendment rights to discriminate against a same-sex couple who is trying to get, a wedding cake made. So it's like, well, I don't have a problem with them, I just don't want to serve them in my business. Do you think that is homophobic? Because, I mean, when the same argument is made for minorities, I would call that racist.
It's hard because when it comes to religion, but the history has always been, like, religious differences have always been at the crux of so many differences and conflicts in history. Like, this dates, like, thousands of years. And I'm not surprised that it's still something that is in conflict. But what I think is, like, I always say, if you allow this in one area, how could people not make the same arguments and say, I don't support interracial marriage, and I don't have anything against Black people, I don't have anything against white people, but I just don't want to support a union where there's a Black and a white woman. And some people might say, oh, people don't exist like that anymore, but that's not true. There are people today who are not comfortable, or people might say, I don't like immigrants. Like, if you are an immigrant, then I think that I don't want to kill you or hurt you, but I'm not going to provide you any services. So I feel like not only is it like a issue of is this a violation of someone's right, but if we were to allow people to discriminate, because that's what it is, you are not doing something based on gender, sexual orientation, or race, that's discrimination. And if you are allowed to do that based on one identity and one aspect, how could it not then be made an argument that it could be done in other areas? And that's why I think we have to make really clear lines and say, like, that's discrimination, that's wrong. And for me, that particular instance was homophobic. It was his actions were homophobic.
Right, because ultimately they're rooted in the belief that these two people should not be married. And so because he has that belief, then he's like, well, I'm not going to support them in their union by providing this service that they are paying for. And I think that, if I remember correctly, they were also willing to pay more to get it done. So it's like, I don't know. But I think that, as I get older, I realize that so many of us forget the fundamental things that we were taught in like kindergarten, right? Which is treat others as you would want to be treated, which is also, for all of us out there that identify as Christian or with any religion, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So, it's like you have the same things that you're kind of basing oftentimes your homophobia in are the same things that are telling you not to be homophobic. It's like really contradictory.
Yeah, because with that argument, then we would say, is he okay with making a case for heterosexual couples that live with each other before they get married?
Yeah.
Is he okay with making a case for a woman who's not a virgin? Because if we're going to go with the whole, like, okay, these are my religious beliefs, then let's go with your religious beliefs and not just pick and choose and say, oh, same-sex marriage is wrong. But, like, isn't, having sex before marriage wrong? Isn't living with someone before you're married wrong? Isn't divorce, isn't that frowned upon? And so I just want,
right? So
sometimes I'm just like,
for people that are on their second marriage,
it's like, the current president is on his third wife, cheats on her, and that's okay, but somehow same-sex marriage is immoral. Like, I want people to call it what it is and say, it's not just my religious belief, it's that I don't like that. And then stop hiding behind your religious belief if it's not totally that, because that's when it gets, like, I just get upset when people hide their prejudice in other things instead of being real and saying, like, no, I think it's disgusting, I think it's sinful, but you're not saying that, you're saying it's against my religious beliefs, but I bet you that they don't check among heterosexual couples to see if they abide by their religious beliefs.
Yeah, no, they definitely don't. All these, like, it's like, I don't know, it's like, the idea that, and even all of, that's my issue with so much of this, is like, it's all so subjective, right? So you can, among all these other things, you can also find in the Bible that all these sins are weighed equal, and yet we take it upon ourselves to, create these, like, hierarchies and say that, like, oh, this sin is at the top, this is the worst of the worst. And it's like, no, who's making that call, you or your God? That's what we really need to revisit. We need to go back to the fundamentals, focus on the fact that you are supposed to be loving your neighbor, you're supposed to be doing it unto them as you would have them do unto you, and no one enjoys discrimination. I've heard people claim that, like, I would prefer that if they're gonna be, whatever ism, sexist, racist, homophobic, whatever, they do it to my face rather than behind my back. No. Nobody wants to be treated poorly. No. So let's all treat people the way that we would want them to treat us. Because we can all have our own isms, our own hatred. Maybe we're going to start hating people that wear black shoes. Would you want to be hated for your black shoe choice? No, you would not. So stop just picking random reasons to dislike people and live your life with love and peace in your heart. Okay.
Yes.
So, would you say, and I guess this is something that we can both weigh in on, do you think that racial and ethnic minority communities are more homophobic? That's a huge question, but maybe based on, like, anecdotal experience.
So, with this question, I was actually surprised because I was looking at research and blog, not just academic research, but just like what people in pop culture and people who weren't researchers were saying. And on the one hand, there are people who say that there is more homophobia in racial ethnic minority communities. And I've interviewed people who say that they feel that the Latino and then the Black community is very homophobic. One, because it's largely driven by the large role that the church plays in these communities. And two, because they feel that masculinity in these communities is more rigid than it is among whites. But then I also get people who say that this is just, again, an assumption about how these communities are pathological. And so I was actually reading an article on the pushback from not only, so I don't know if you watch Empire by Lee Daniels. There's a character who is a sexual minority. And I didn't know this, but Lee Daniels himself is a sexual minority. Mm-hmm. And he said that character was inspired by his experience. Mm-hmm. And so he talked about how he wanted to highlight homophobia in the Black community. And then from that, Kerry Washington talked about homophobia in the Black community. And so many people gave them both pushback and said, gay rights isn't just, pushback against gay rights isn't just happening amongst Black folks. And then they point out that there are a lot of crimes against sexual minorities and gender minorities, like the murders of Matthew Shepard and Brandon Teena, that were committed by white people, as well as by right-wing politicians who advocate for anti-LGBT legislation. And they highlight that ignorance and hate are not Black exclusive. So I was kind of like, I don't know, from my personal experience and the people that I interview, it seems like they feel that the racial ethnic community is more homophobic. But there are people from these very communities saying that that's not true, that we are once again just saying these negative things about these communities without looking at how the same things are happening in white communities. So I don't know, I'm kind of like torn between it, but just if I go based on my own research, I would say it is. But what do you think?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I guess I don't really have as much, like, this is also, so again, this is not my area of research, and I also don't have a whole ton of exposure with the non-minority people in general, and for those relationships that I do have with, like, white folks, these are not the conversations that we have. So, based on, like, my own experience, I can say that I have witnessed, a ton of homophobia within the Black community. And I guess, in terms of my own research, so my research now is on masculinity, and within Black masculinity, a lot of that is defined by homophobia. So, I mean, I think that there is a lot of homophobia in the Black community. I think that a lot of it is rooted in Christianity, and on the other end, Black masculinity. But if we think about who our vice president is, who is a white man, and who has also reportedly a supporter of gay conversion therapy, which is insane.
Yeah.
And the fact that he has a lot of supporters. I think that we can see instances where not only is there a significant, proportion of white folks who might be homophobic. I mean, if we think about the South, right? The South is called the Bible Belt, not just because of Black Southerners, but also, white Southerners. And a lot of the tenets of those beliefs emphasizes homophobia. And so, I mean, based on the premise that, God did not intend for same-sex individuals to partner, right? And so I think that if you think about what, Mike Pence's base, right? Like, a lot of that is rooted in, a lot of their beliefs and their homophobic beliefs are rooted in Christianity, along with a lot of his other really sexist beliefs about, like, like pro-life and all of these things. So, I mean, I think that maybe I couldn't really envision a Black politician building homophobia into their campaign. So I think that maybe the lengths at which Black folks are willing to go to, profess their homophobia are probably different. Yeah, so the fact that, like, his campaign, a lot of his, like, what his talking points are based in homophobia and sexism is, like, really kind of strange to me. And so I think that is a lot of bit different. A lot different. So I don't know. I guess I'm torn on that.
Yeah, me too.
But, I mean, one thing that what you said about Lee Daniels that I think is super interesting and kind of in line with the direction that we're going to go, because the next question is, if you are homophobic and anti-racist, are you a hypocrite? Right, so Lee Daniels has, in previous interviews, or at least a previous interview that I listened to, been quoted as saying that racism is like fiction, that it's made up. And so for him to claim that he sees homophobia in the Black community, but then at the same time, or in the same breath, racism is like made up, or that I can't remember his exact wording, so I might be butchering it, but that was the gist of it. I'm wondering if, well, one, can you be anti-racism and homophobic at the same time? But then can you also be anti-homophobia and kind of just not think that racism exists? Like, how is it that you're able to see and identify with one ism? And I mean, strangely, this is a Black gay man, so I'm like, how? Because I personally have I just can't see myself not supporting a minority movement of any kind, just because of my own identity as a Black woman, and recognizing that all the oppression and marginalization that comes with, right? So when I see other groups, or I know of other groups being oppressed or marginalized or discriminated against or whatever, I empathize with that. And I feel like that's a movement that I need to get behind. Now, am I going to claim that I support all movements, all minority movements with the same amount of fervor and passion and all of that stuff? No. But I can't, like, turn a blind eye and claim that, their experiences are not real, or, experiences of homophobia are not that big a deal. It's like, no, I think that that's unfair, and I think it's unfair to use your platform in that way. Like, if you do feel that way, just because you don't experience it, just be quiet, I think.
Yeah. I'm similar. I feel like, well, for me, I'm Latina, and so my community is the Latino community. So the Latino community for me includes everyone in the Latino community. So it includes immigrants, it includes women, it includes men, and sexual minorities. So I feel like if you are anti-something, if you are an advocate or activist for your community, I would just like to hear your explanation and reasoning for not supporting or advocating for members of your community. It's tough. I feel like this conversation is very difficult to have among our communities because of this very question that we're trying to answer, which is, some people are like, I am anti-racist, I am anti-sexist, but do I have to also be anti-homophobic?
Yeah, I agree with you. The answers are tough, because I think, it's not easy. This level of these are things that are difficult to undo. So if you your entire life have been receiving messages that, that homosexuality is wrong, being transgender is wrong, all of these things, then it might be hard as an adult or whatever stage in your life to undo all of that. Because we do live, it's crazy, because even though, the United States is based in, actually I guess it's not that crazy. The United States is based in Christianity. And so we receive a lot of messages from the time that we are kids that the way that couples are supposed to look is a cis man and a cis woman, and they're supposed to come together and they're supposed to have families and all of these things. So oftentimes when we see things that are not that, our brains automatically kind of signal to us that is a deviation from the norm, that is not right. But there is work that you can do to reverse that. Just in the same way that people that kind of grow up in households that promote racism can reverse that, even as adults. Like, those things can be undone. So don't be so comfortable in your way of thinking that you are putting a wall up when people are trying to have conversations with you about what homophobia is, what transphobia is, or even in listening to this episode. Like, be open to allowing yourself to challenge or question some of the things that you've been taught, some of the things that you think are wrong. And so again, like what Zelma is saying, like maybe in this episode we're not going to change your mind. Maybe you're not going to be like, okay, yeah, same-sex marriage is right. But be open to the fact that no person, regardless of how much you disagree with whoever they are, no person deserves to be treated. Well, I don't want to say no person. There are some people. But no one deserves to be oppressed or marginalized just based on who they are. So period. We can talk about like, and I don't know. I guess this is semantics because I'm thinking right now that like there might be people out there like, oh, well, what about these people? Like not necessarily people that are gay or transgender or whatever. These people might deserve to be treated poorly. And this is occurring to me just because I've been hearing a lot about how apparently they're trying to make or classify pedophilia as within the sexual minority. Like, yeah. I still got a ways to go as far as that's concerned. I don't think I'm that open, but that's a whole different conversation. So I think that staying in line with what we're talking about right now, just if all you can do is appreciate and accept that people don't deserve to be oppressed, people don't deserve to be discriminated against or have violent acts committed against them, then that is a step in the right direction.
Yes, and like in terms of like the pedophilia thing, like sexual minorities are like two consenting adults engaging in a relationship, and a pedophile is someone who engages in a relationship with a child who is not able to grant consent, and someone who has a preference for forcible sexual encounters is based on interactions that are not consensual. So I know, like, and if you ever get to a conversation with someone where they're arguing about the semantics, that's when you know that they don't really want to have a conversation with you about the content, but they just want to debate. And so, like Ebony was saying, this podcast wasn't to try to tell people, to convince them why they should just accept non-heterosexuality as whatever it means to you. It's just trying to highlight that for sexual minorities, their experiences are very, very difficult due to a lack of protection, not only legal, not only social, but that all contributes to negative experiences that have real life consequences for them, which kind of ties into our next point, which is about like what are the consequences to homophobia and transphobia, specifically for people of color. And so there's this thing called double disadvantage, and it sounds just like what it is. It's like twice the amount of disadvantage. So I think most of us can agree that as a racial ethnic minority, we are disadvantaged in terms of we are minorities in a society that privileges the status of a certain status. So like white people in general have different experiences than racial ethnic minorities due to a lot of reasons, a lot of historical events, a lot of assumptions, a lot of stereotypes, a lot of stratification, a lot of segregation. And so the same thing happens with sexual minorities. So individuals who are non-heterosexual, who are people of color, not only face homophobia within their racial community, but also racism within the LGBT community, leaving them torn between the two. Because from my research, what I found is that even though just because the LGBT community is marginalized in terms of their sexual minority status, does not mean that they are not racist. And so for people of color who are trying to turn to a sexual minority community, sometimes they find that that community is just as racist as the heterosexual community. So like thinking about these people of color not having like a source of support, a community to turn to. And so if they are rejected not only by the LGBT community because of the racism in that community, which has been documented that it's very pervasive and very common, then if we are to reject them in our racial ethnic communities, they leave them as very isolated people. And isolated people do things to cope with that isolation. And that's why we see in terms of mental health rates, we see increased rates of suicide, increased rates of depression, increased rates of homelessness among teenagers, increased rates of sexual violence. Like these are things that are particularly impacting, in particular, sexual minorities of color. So that is just something we wanted to highlight in this episode, is that it's not just about not being able to bake a cake for someone. It's not just about you not agreeing with their lifestyle. Sometimes these lead to actions that have real life consequences for the bodies and the lives and the well-being of this community. And so it's just important for us to remember that certain communities are vulnerable, and particularly sexual minorities of color are extremely vulnerable. And so talking about the double disadvantage in terms of sexual orientation and being a racial ethnic minority, there's also the experiences of transgender individuals. And so if you've probably, been on social media or just heard people talking about the experiences of transgender people, you might have come across discussions about the experiences of transgender people of color. And so particularly for that community, transgender people of color, according to the U.S. Transgender Survey, transgender people continue to face discrimination throughout daily life. And the report illustrates that Black transgender respondents face deeper and broader forms of discrimination than their white counterparts, and are more likely to be unemployed and poor and living with HIV. And also, just a striking fact for us to think about is, I know sometimes we throw around the life expectancy of a Black man and how short it is. But in terms of the average life expectancy of a Black trans man, which is a person who was born male but identifies now as female, their life expectancy is 35. Wow. And so the average transgender Black woman will not live older than 35 years old. Wow. And that's not and that's due to violence. That's due to most likely being murdered, to most likely dying of illness. And these are people in our communities. I just feel like for me, it's beyond whether I understand why you are transgender. Beyond understanding their experience, beyond understanding their choices. It's about, is it okay?
Yeah, or even beyond, like, agreeing with. Like, even if you don't agree with it, and there are a lot of people that say, I've heard so many men say, I don't agree with that lifestyle. And it's like, we could unpack that sentence for hours. But all of that sentence lets me know, when I hear it, that you lack empathy. You have no interest in empathizing with this group. You already have settled in on your belief that this is a lifestyle, that this is a choice. All of which, if you just have a conversation with any conversation that I've had with someone who is gay, who identifies as lesbian, does not at all signal to me that, oh, I have chosen this. This is a choice that I'm making, and, you know, I actually have, like, heterosexual, like, feelings, but I'm choosing instead to be gay. I'm choosing instead to be lesbian. No. And also, I mean, I think also for, like Zelma was saying, right, so it's not easy in our society, and I think that everybody can agree, it's not easy to be, if we're focusing on, like, say, racial minority communities, right, it can't be easy to be a gay, black, or Latino man. That does not, I don't think that that's an easy, I don't think that those people have easy lives. And so if you know that these people receive a lot of hatred from, you know, like a lot of homophobia from heterosexual communities and from their own racial communities, do you really think that they would choose to identify that way if they could? And also, I'm saying this, you know, not just based on my own kind of my own perspective, but I also, so there's a podcast that Zelma and I actually both listen to called The Read, and both of the hosts identify as sexual minorities. One of the hosts is a gay man, and he has actually said that out of his own mouth, that if I could choose, I would not choose to be a gay black man, because also he's Jamaican, and Jamaicans are notoriously homophobic. And so, no, that's not something that is a lifestyle choice. So I would just caution you also, in having conversations or in the way that you think about this, if you stop thinking about it as a choice, you know, that could also then alter or put challenge a lot of the other beliefs that you have. So sorry to interrupt you, Z, but again, like...
No.
Yeah, like you need to, regardless of whether you, like she's saying, regardless of whether you understand, and regardless of whether you agree, like, you should have some level of empathy and respect for human life.
Yeah, and I just don't know, like, just think, like, are you okay with someone in the United States dying at 35? And if you are, then there are deeper questions to ask. Yeah. But it all boils down to, this is, to me, is not okay. No one should only have 35. What can you do in 35 years? Like, I'm 29, and I can't imagine, like, just being, like, I have until 35. And we just wanted to highlight that in this episode, is that it's not just about disagreeing. It's about people of color who are transgender and don't identify as heterosexual, have experiences that contribute to what I would call just harsher lived experiences. And I am always ready to fight for anyone that is what I would call this an injustice. And so just wanted to highlight those statistics before we ended the episode, and just to make sure that that's what's at stake.
I don't know. This is like many of the other topics that we discuss on our podcast. This is heavy. It's complex. We also, again, don't have all the answers. I don't think that anyone has all the answers. And I mean, maybe in the future, because these topics are so complex, I think that they are, a number of the topics that we've already discussed we'll probably circle back to. And maybe in the future we can have someone on who identifies as a sexual minority, who identifies as transgender, just to get their voices out there. Because I think, I don't know about you, but I think that for some people, a lot of times it does, to put a voice to it, to allow their own narrative to kind of be broadcasted, I think it could help too. Because I'm just thinking about the people that I know that listen to our podcast on a regular basis, and I know that a lot of them are very loving individuals and who at the same time have some, I don't want to call it hatred, but have some like disdain or objection to people who identify as homosexual. And so I think that if you made it this far through the episode and you are one of those people, good for you, proud of you. And again, like, as we close out, please, if you have any questions or comments, or we have left you on some kind of cliffhanger, reach out to us. Like, don't hesitate.
Yes. Yes, and if you are a member of these communities and would like to clarify anything, would like to address some of the topics or bullet points, would just like to share your experience or anything, also feel free to contact us. We won't disclose, your identity or anything if you don't want to. But like Ebony said, I think what's important is that I believe deep down that most people aren't terrible people.
Yeah.
And if they hear someone, and if they hear someone, emotionally talking about their experience and how they have been impacted by this community, then I think that, it will leave an impact. It might not change mine, but it will leave an impact for sure. And hopefully that's what this episode did, is we don't want, our goal wasn't to change anyone's mind, but it was just to bring up questions to ask each other and ourselves so that we could question some of those beliefs and assumptions that we have had about sexual minorities and transgender, especially in communities of color.
Yeah. So thanks for listening. Thank you for all of those who have continued to listen to us from episode 1, even those that are just tuning in. Also, if you want to go back and listen to some of our first few episodes, if you haven't, they're pretty good. Not to toot my own horn or our own horn, but they're pretty good. Yeah, so thanks for continuing to support us. This is the end of episode 11. It's crazy how much time has gone by and how quickly, we've almost been recording for 3 months. So, woo!
I know.
Yeah. Crazy. But with that, we're going to close out.
Yes. So if you have any comments, any feedback, including questions, even if you disagree with something we said, Ebony and I are by no means, we can be wrong. But even if it's just some future topic ideas that you feel like would be beneficial to discuss. We've had some feedback about our last episode, and as a result, we're going to kind of provide a follow-up. So this is a podcast for the community, so just feel free to email us at woke.ishpodcast@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at wokeishpodcast. You can send us a DM or drop us a comment. Also continue to we provide clips of our episodes. Continue to like those. Follow our episodes. It's now on iTunes, and we're working on getting them for our Android users.
Yes.
And then lastly, feel free to follow us on Twitter at
wokeishpod.
Yeah. So thank you so much for listening, and until next time.
And tell a friend.
Yes.
Bye.